Tonight, the MichICAN Nightly Radio Show, the Perception Deception Show, we've got Rick Simpson. Everybody's familiar with Rick, his past experience, his kind of fame that's come along with him with the rediscovery of Rick Simpson Oil. Everybody's quite aware of that, but so tonight what we're going to do is we're going to go on the other side of the fence and talk about Prohibition, talk about the history of Prohibition and the involvement of the industrial complexes, the various ones that are involved in Prohibition and what got us to where we are today. For those of you who may not know who Rick is, Rick, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a background on yourself and just let people know who may not be familiar with you.
Well, actually, it was through the, it was because I had back in 1997, I suffered a severe head injury at work, and I had never really looked at cannabis as being medicine at that time, and this injury left me with what they call post-concussion syndrome. And in my case, like I had migraine noise all the time, and that drives your blood pressure crazy, and also other effects of the injury gave me like balance problems, and my blood pressure was all over the place. It was really horrible, but I couldn't get rid of this noise. I mean, I worked in a hospital. I was at a hospital, working in a hospital when this happened. But I mean, I went through the medical system. I took their chemicals and pills, and actually all they did was make me much, much worse. And about a year after I was injured, I happened to watch an episode of The Nature of Things with Dr. David Suzuki. And they showed patients on this episode. It was called Reefer Madness 2. But they showed people on this, on this doctor in Nature of Things that were smoking cannabis. And it was doing wonderful things for their medical difficulties. So I went out and I had smoked cannabis before, but like I said, I never looked at it as, as being a medicine. Mm-hmm. So I went out and I got some cannabis, smoked it. Sure enough, it worked. It gave me, the trouble with me is, you see, I couldn't get any sleep. I would maybe once or twice a day, I would just pass out from exhaustion. And that would be maybe an hour, and then the noise would wake me back up again. I mean, it was just a horror story.
You had major tinnitus and ringing in the ears, I take it?
Well, mine isn't ear damage. Mine was really caused from a head injury. It injured my brain, and that's the reason I have this noise. There's nothing they can do about it.
Interesting.
And actually, I mean, most people that have what I have, they wind up committing suicide in a short time because it ruins your life. It just drives you crazy.
I can imagine.
So, it's a horror story. But when I seen the effects of the cannabis, I went to the doctors. Every doctor I seen, I asked them for a prescription because in Canada we had a medical marijuana access program already in place. Right. So I told these doctors, I said, just smoking cannabis does a lot more for me than any of these pills you're giving me because they tend to be making me worse. But, every doctor I went to, same story. It's still under study. It's bad for the lungs. It was just amazing. But so I just, I worked in the medical system. So I continued to take their pills and everything. By 1999, I was getting suicidal, from the effects of some of these medications. And the noise and everything was still there. So, I went to the doctor one day, and it just popped into my head. I said, what would happen if I was to make the essential oil and ingest that oil as a medication as opposed to smoking it? And that's what I asked my doctor. Mm-hmm. And he got a really strange look on his face when I come up with that. But he did say it would be a much more medicinal way to use this plant. Sure. But still, they wouldn't provide me with a prescription. So actually, I went home and I made some extract. I think it was the same day or the day after. And but when I produced it, I mean, it came out beautifully. Mm-hmm. I got it right the first time. And, even using my own method. Right. But the thing is, I didn't know what I had created. I knew, if you take a pound of cannabis and then you're condensing all of the cannabinoids in that pound into, 2 ounces, mm-hmm. You've got a really strong concentrate. Sure. So I, from what the doctors had told me and things of that nature, like how bad it was, I knew it would be sedative because smoking, the heavy indica strains, that helped me sleep. At least a little bit longer than I could on the pills and chemicals. But, when you produce this extract, I didn't know really what I had. And I thought, if I started taking it, that it could do something horrible to me because I had no knowledge of its medical abilities at the time. So, anyway, this took on for almost 3 years. Then in late 2001, I went into my doctor's office. They called me in, and the doctor told me point blank. He said, "There's nothing more we can do for you. We tried everything we have. You're on your own."
Right.
And so I asked him right that day again. I said, "Well, give me a prescription for cannabis so I can legally use this plant."
Right.
It's a medical access program.
Right. Yeah. Not wanting to go on a legal side, not having a job you had to contend with. You probably didn't want to worry about losing your job for treating yourself. Yeah. I mean, you'd think that would be the thing that they would want to do.
Anyway, the doctor again, no prescription. So, I did try, the Pain Management Center in Halifax. I called them, I think the same day I left my doctor's office, because I'd heard that they could help make arrangements, to help you get your license. So you could possess this legally.
Right.
And, but when I called them, there was a 21-month waiting period.
Wow.
Before anybody would even talk to you. That's almost 2 years.
Yeah, we thought it was bad in Michigan.
So I went home, and I had no choice then, so I started using this medication, or ingesting small amounts of the soil, in the evening. And, man, I'll tell you, immediately it started helping me sleep, especially as I increased the dosage, and that's what I needed.
Right.
And in no time, I was getting 8-10 hours of sleep.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't had that in 5 years.
Yeah.
So it was very refreshing. And really when I was done taking all those chemicals and pills from the doctors, my thinking processes were so bad from those chemicals that I couldn't hardly even remember my own name.
Yeah.
And if you ask anybody that's ever taken these drugs, they'll tell you the same thing. I mean, it just
Absolutely.
stupefies you.
Absolutely.
It's unbelievable. But, on the oil, my thinking processes started coming back. All of a sudden, I started losing weight. And actually I did. I lost about 40 pounds in a very short, in about a month and a half.
Wow.
And it just amazed me. It actually scared me because I didn't know at the time, why am I losing all this weight? But really what was happening, the oil was just bringing me back to what I should weigh for my height. And I've maintained that weight ever since. So it's been nothing but good for me. Then all of a sudden, as I was taking the oil, my blood pressure, which had been fluctuating wildly for 5 years, all of a sudden it came under control.
Nice.
And then the arthritis in my knees disappeared. And it was just making me feel so much better. I mean, everybody around me, they all seen the improvement. It was just totally amazing. So, I just, at the time I was still, I think, under the effects of these drugs, because it takes a while to get these horrible chemicals out of your system.
Sure.
So I was still a little bit stupid about things. But then in late 2002, I had these 3 areas. One close to my eye, on the right side of my nose, and another on my left cheek, and another on my chest. And these were open lesions that I'd had since the 1990s.
Okay.
And I strongly suspected that they were actually skin cancer. But none of us really want to admit that to ourselves, I guess.
Sure.
So I kept putting it off, and then in late 2002, I went into my doctor's office, and I had a look at the areas, and as soon as he looked at them, he said, it looks like skin cancer, but he said, I won't know until we get a pathology report back. So I'm okay, and he said, we're going to send you in and get this one done because it was quite close to my right eye. We'll take care of that first, then we'll do the other 2 at a later date. So I agreed, and about 2 or 3 weeks or a month later, I went in and they removed this one here. And so it was about a week afterwards, it was, I removed the bandage and I was looking at it with this magnified mirror, and it was infected a bit. That's quite common in hospitals today. And you know, it was pretty ugly, you know, what they had done. But I thought, you know, so what? And it was just at that moment, a study I'd heard the results of back in the mid-'70s popped back into my head, you know, and really what it was, see, my cousin had died in 1972 at 25 years of age, you know, cancer.
Right.
And cancer was rare then. I mean, he was the first person I ever knew that had this disease, and he was also the first person I ever knew that died from it. You know, so it was quite rare at the time. But about 3 years afterwards, you see, I was working at a hospital, so I just got in my car and I was on the way home, and I didn't even get out of the driveway, and I heard this report. This fool, the announcer, he was laughing like an idiot. You know, this report just in: THC, the active ingredient in marijuana. You know, that's another word.
Right.
I think we should start calling it what it is: cannabis.
Thank you.
Has been found to kill cancer cells. You know, but they made such a joke of it.
Right.
I just thought, you know, like, this is just someone's sick sense of humor at play.
Right.
So, you know, but for some reason, I think it was due to my cousin's death. You know, I witnessed all that, and I was about 23 years of age when that took place. And, you know, I mean, that was a real horror story. So I think that's what, you know, why this information stuck in my mind.
Sure.
But here I am, you know, like I said, you know, almost 30 years later, and they'd already removed the one cancer. And I thought, you know, and I looked at the oil I had been taking for over a year, or about a year, and I thought, well, this oil is full of THC. So if THC actually kills cancer, then why do I still have cancer?
Right.
It don't make sense, you know.
Right.
But then I never thought about it, but our body is the biggest organ really that we have. And actually you can cure skin cancer by ingesting oil, but you have to ingest a great deal of it, you know, to get it out to the skin.
Sure.
Because you got to saturate your body is what you have to do. But you know, I kind of argued back and forth with myself, and then I thought, well, why not go down and just try it on the other two areas? And you know, both of these areas, if you have basal cell carcinoma, it feels like you have a splinter or something in the affected area, and there's usually some puffed up and bleeding, you know, and this open, you know, sore that just won't heal. And so this is what I was experiencing. And so I went down, and the minute I put that oil on each one, within a minute or two, that feeling of splinters, it just disappeared. So I put a bandage on each one, and I left them in place for 4 days. And I really thought that it was doing nothing.
Right.
It was nice to get rid of that splinter feeling, but
right.
No, there was no pain. I didn't feel a thing. So 4 days later, I go down to my bathroom, and I'm standing there looking in a mirror. And I peeled the one off my cheek first, and all that was there was just pink skin, completely healed.
Nice.
And then, oh my God, what is this? And then
right.
I took the one off my chest, and it was the same. So, I mean, I went out, and then I started telling friends and neighbors that, you know, I think the extracts from the cannabis plant, you know, healed my cancer.
Actually healed the cancer.
Yeah. And, you know, but people were just shocked, you know, when I said this, and most people just laughed in my face.
Well, yeah, especially probably for, you know, your friends, they know you, they know you're in the medical field, they're probably aware of some of the things you've been dealing with. Yeah, I can see why they would think you're kind of quacked up a little bit.
But anyway, I mean, I told everyone that I knew, and like I said, they, you know, it was just, yeah, right, Rick, yeah, marijuana cures cancer. Okay, sorry,
right.
You know, I'm sorry for the bad news, folks, but it's all true. It does.
It does.
Oh, God. But anyway, you know, I went on like this for about 6 weeks, and really at that point, I was starting, you know, to question it myself, because I was my own first patient, you know, and I thought, you know, this really, you know, there's something wrong here. This, you know, I must be, you know, a little bit out of my mind over this. So anyway, about 7 weeks after the surgery had been performed by my eye, that cancer came roaring right back. You know, that same splinter in the face feeling, and the bleeding and the puffiness. So I watched it develop for 3-4 days to make sure, and yeah, that's it, because I had experienced it before.
Right.
So I took a drop of this oil, and I put it on that same area, and I put a bandage on it. 4 days later, I removed the bandage, all pink skin.
Nice.
Completely healed.
Wow.
Now that's over 12 and a half years ago.
Right.
I've never had to retreat these areas. Never.
Excellent.
So I went down to my doctor's office, and I got a copy. I asked them for a copy of my pathology report. So they give me the pathology report, and it states right there, basal cell carcinoma, totally excised.
Right.
They always get it all, don't they?
Right.
What a joke. Mine was back in 7 weeks. So anyway, the doctor, actually his receptionist, is actually his wife. And so the doctor, I asked the receptionist if she had given me the pathology report, and this was like a country doctor.
Right.
I respected him, and I thought, that we kind of knew each other well. And I'd been going to him for years, and so she asked me, I asked her, I said, I'd like to come in the evening and have a talk with the doctor about something I've been working on. And she looked at me and she said, well, what's this about? And I said, well, that cancer they removed, it came right back. And I said, so I healed it and the other 2 areas using hemp oil. And the minute I said that, she literally just hunched. The doctor will not go there. The doctor will not prescribe this.
Right.
Screaming at me. And I'm standing in a waiting room with 5 or 6 other people waiting to see the doctor. And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here?
Right.
So I get in my vehicle, and I was driving home that day, and I got thinking, I said, well, if I was a doctor and somebody had cured their cancer with something natural, I'd want to know about it.
Yeah.
So why don't
You'd think. Yeah, you'd think so.
Yeah. So anyway, I went home, and that day, and I started actually giving it out to other people I knew that had psoriasis and skin conditions and things of that nature. And other skin cancers, diabetic ulcers, anything like that, it'll heal it in no time.
Excellent.
So, I passed it out, for topical use for a few months. And then I started passing it out to people with serious internal conditions like cancer. Because, I had been eating this then for like a year and a half, 2 years. Hadn't harmed me any, that's for sure. So I started giving it to people, to help, treat these serious illnesses. And at the same time, I went to, I started going to all the different things, you would do. I contacted every political party. I contacted 2 federal ministers of health over this, Dr. David Suzuki. I contacted the news media, like W5, the Fifth Estate, all of them. Look at this. We went to the Cancer Society. I even went to the United Nations about this.
Wow.
Nobody would do a damn thing. And here I was, it was healing people left and right. Like diseases that, some of the diseases I never even heard of before. So, the results were amazing, but all I got, from the government was nothing but rejection.
Right.
So I just continued on, and in 2004, I openly went to our local newspaper. They did a full-page article detailing all my activities about the oil and everything.
Right.
Big picture of me. So I wasn't hiding anything. I was trying to get the government to do what was right for the people.
Right.
Here's a wonderful, simple, natural healing extract that's basically, from what I've seen of it, even at that time, I realized, like, this has got to be the most wonderful medicine on this earth.
Right.
When you consider all the things it can do.
Yeah, and all the things it doesn't do.
There's not much that it doesn't do, believe me.
Well, as far as like getting you addicted to, pain pills and the other issues that come along, the side effects from it. Yeah, what it doesn't do, it heals you and doesn't kill you.
But what was happening? More and more people were coming to me, and I was a grower, so I was growing the plants and I was supplying the oil for nothing. Just give it to them,
Right.
Watch what happens. But then, like in early 2005, we had a meeting at the local Legion in MichICAN. And at that meeting, there was about 50 people attended, and I brought in about a dozen patients who had used it. And, well, there it is. Here's these, and these aren't, hippies or anything like that. These are a lot of them are, senior citizens. And they were telling, the whole audience, what the oil had done for them.
Right.
So I videotaped this whole session, And of course, we sent I made copies of it. I sent videotape to W5, to Fifth Estate, and different places like that. David, David Suzuki. You know, I sent them to everybody I could. You know, look at this.
Right.
Same thing, nothing. You know, no return. So then, in May 2003, I took a copy, you know, of this tape right into the local RCMP detachment in Amherst, and I gave it to them, and I told them, I said, look, you know, there's local politicians here that should be charged with criminal negligence causing death,
Right.
because they're not doing their jobs, you know. And I told them, you know, this is a meeting which was held in MichICAN at the Legion, and you know, there's evidence on here of what this wonderful medicine can do, and I told them openly, I'm growing it right in my own backyard.
Right.
I wasn't hiding anything. And I even asked them, I said, you know, I would like you to provide me with some of the high quality bud that you confiscate from these drug dealers, so I can make more medicine. So I left the RCMP detachment, and we videotaped the whole thing. It's all on video. And we were smart enough to do that. But it was 3 months later. The same detachment. I had 1,620 plants in my backyard. Big, beautiful female plants. And the same detachment, you know, that I had taken this evidence to, they come and raid me. So I was charged with cultivation, possession, and trafficking.
Right.
So I was giving oil away, but that's trafficking.
Yeah.
You know, not to us, because trafficking actually means the exchange of goods for monetary gain.
Right.
Well, I wasn't gaining anything.
Yeah, there's got to be some kind of gain for there to be traffic.
Well, that's one of the charges. And actually, in the end, I mean, through corruption, you know, and jury tampering and everything you can imagine. I mean, this is, you know, this is one of the charges I was found guilty of in the great country of Canada. So don't ever try to heal anybody in Canada; they'll put you in jail.
Yeah, same thing here.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, even some of the officers that were involved in that raid that day, I remember one of them. She was sitting on the deck with me, and of course, I was just foaming at the mouth.
Right.
You know, I was so frustrated. And then this officer, she looked at me, and she said, "I believe everything you're saying." And then I looked at her, I said, "Well, then where are your morals?"
Right.
I said, "This is medicine." I said, "Look what your people are doing." You know, I'm just doing my job. Oh, isn't that nice? So, anyway, I went through all of that nonsense. Like I said, I was charged with 3 charges. They fingerprinted me, you know, because dangerous criminals like me must be kept track of.
Right.
So, anyway, you know, I just kept going. I had to start getting material and stuff from other growers at that time because I had hardly anything to work with.
Right.
And but you know, the beat goes on, and we kept supplying the people with oil. And then the following year, I put another 1,100 clones in right in my backyard again, same thing. And then in early September, in they come again. You know, RCMP.
Right.
You know, or their drug squad or whatever they call it. But you know, I just couldn't believe that these idiots would keep doing this. You know, and the evidence was mounting and mounting. We had so much evidence, you know, for what it would do. You know, but finally in 2006, I went through a charter challenge because under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, you are supposed to have the right to life. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't.
Right.
You know, the bottom line is the only time you have that right is when you're willing to take their chemicals and poisons and other insane treatments. Then you have the right to life, but you probably won't have that life for long because they'll likely kill you. But the use of a natural medication, oh, no. That's strictly forbidden.
Right.
Even when they have a medical marijuana access program in place, which recognizes this as being a medicine, you know, this is the way they behave.
Now, with the program that you guys got up there in Canada, was that started by the people, or is that a government-initiated situation? How did Canada get their program?
That's the smoke screen that the government put up to make the Canadian people believe that they're actually doing something.
Okay, so the government actually did it, but yeah, from what we hear down here, it's very hard for people. You know, I'm in Michigan down here in the States, and it's hard for people up there, it seems like, to get access to the program like you were describing earlier. It's set in place, but they almost make it impossible to actually use. we've got a couple of states that have medical laws. We have one ourselves, but there's a couple of states that have medical laws, and that's the way they've handled it, is don't let anybody on it. I think Missouri or Montana is one of those that's had it for about 7 or 8 years now, maybe even longer, but they almost have nobody on it because they make it so hard to get access to it. You almost basically are almost in the grave before they allow you access to it anyways.
Oh yeah, you're quite right. But I mean, so during this charter challenge, they had told me to gather up affidavits proving what I'm saying.
Okay.
So I put out 120 affidavits, and it was actually about that point, I guess, when I found out what the human race was really about. Because out of that 120 affidavits, I could only collect 48. People that I had, provided this oil to, and had cured their cancers, didn't want to get involved.
Right.
That really disgusted me. But I had 48 sworn affidavits, so I take them in with me as evidence. The judge looks them over and says, oh, these are anecdotal, and throws them in a trash can. And then he sits there and tells me that I didn't present any life-threatening conditions. So according to this judge, skin cancer is not life-threatening.
Right.
Well, that's kind of strange because I know quite a few people that have died from skin cancer.
Yeah.
So it is very life-threatening.
Because skin cancer is one of those ones that if you don't get it and get it right and get it done, it will consume you up fairly quickly.
Well, I mean, they had my pathology report and everything right there in front of them. There it was, basal cell carcinoma. Where's it gone?
Right.
It was so damn obvious. But, and then he said that my other condition, this post-traumatic, or excuse me, I can't even think of the name of it myself now. Post-concussion syndrome. He said, well, that's not life-threatening either. Well, it is very life-threatening because it causes your blood pressure to go all over the place.
Right.
And we both know what can happen, if your blood pressure's, really badly out of whack, you can blow up.
Exactly.
And, and then there's the other part where you're more likely to commit suicide, and I think that's mostly due to the medications they provide. So, that condition, too, is very life-threatening. But anyway, no, they wouldn't do a thing. So I went back, next time I went into court, same judge, same prosecutors, they told me, well, I could appeal the charter challenge. And I just looked at them and I said, well, what's there to appeal? I already know what you people are doing. And I said, and you do too. You're holding the damn truth back from the public. And I said, I want this to go into the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia, and I want it to be heard by a jury. And I want a different judge, and I want different prosecutors. Because I don't put any trust in any of you people. Okay, so we go to court. Same judge, same prosecutors.
Right.
What a joke. So all of a sudden, then they decide, well, now they're going to put up all this. See, the prosecution goes first in Canada. I don't know about the U.S. But,
I think same way.
Anyway, yeah. Okay, so they bring all these brave police officers, RCMP officers, put them on the stand. There was about 6 of them, and they go on about their brave exploits in my backyard. What a joke that was. So, after they were done presenting all of each officer, I would get to cross-examine them. So then I would hold up a copy of the Spring Hill record, a year before I was ever charged.
Right.
And I said, would a criminal go to the local newspaper and have a full-page article done about his activities?
Right.
And then each Mountie, or each RCMP officer, they all had to admit, well, no, a criminal wouldn't behave that way.
Right.
And then I asked him, I said, well, what about the evidence that I took to the RCMP detachment in Amherst? What about the evidence I took to them 3 months before this raid?
Right.
Well, each one. We know of this evidence, but we have never viewed it. And then I looked at them and I said, well, is it common practice for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police not to look at evidence?
Right.
And they just get this stupid look on their face.
Yeah.
And the judge, of course, he was in bed with them all too. The judge wouldn't make them answer. But in the end, I mean, each and every one of these officers, more or less, in the end, wound up testifying for me. Because, they proved that, well, if
you weren't doing criminal activity.
like this, then who is this guy?
Right. You'd be, in America, you'd be breaching your Fourth Amendment right by, and Fifth Amendment right by not remaining silent and giving, evidence against yourself. which is kind of a catch-22.
Well, I was totally open about this. And so anyway, we, they did that. We went through 6 of those officers, and then they decided they were going to put their the RCMP's marijuana expert on the stand.
Okay.
And I told the prosecution, they told me what they were going to do, and I just told them, I said, you put that monkey on that stand, and I'm going to shred him.
Right.
And anyway, they put him up, and he went on, about his great knowledge and all this nonsense. So I get up and I asked him, I said, yeah, you're here, to represent the RCMP as a marijuana expert. Is that correct, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, it is. I said, what do you know about him? Well, I know nothing about him. I'm a marijuana expert.
Right.
And I looked at him and I said, you're a marijuana expert, and you don't know that what you call marijuana is actually cannabis hemp.
Right.
And then the fool, he tried to argue the point. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And
well, there's a difference because THC the THC level in hemp is low. Yeah.
Yeah. So I couldn't believe that he would argue this point, or he didn't know anything about the subject really. And then during other statements he had made, before I cross-examined him, he had said, that he felt that marijuana presented a danger and it was addictive. And so I asked him, I said, have you ever smoked marijuana, sir? And I couldn't believe it, but he admitted it. He said, well, yes, I have. I said, in your other statements, I said, you said that it made you, it was actually addictive and dangerous. I said, did you become addicted?
Right.
And he went, no.
Right.
Then I said, do you actually feel that it actually presented a danger to you? No.
Did it make you dangerous, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just foolish. So anyway, we got rid of him. And then, I had 10 patients and 6 doctors ready to testify.
Right.
And 2 of these patients had been cured with terminal cancers. Then all of a sudden the judge says, well, I can't allow this. I can't allow you to put these people on the stand. Right. Because you're not allowed to present a medical argument. Right. That's kind of convenient, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I didn't know what to do. The whole thing was fixed, right from top to bottom. But still, I had this mountain of scientific evidence because me and my friends, we had dug everywhere we could to get all the information about this plant possible. Mm-hmm. And I had a box full of scientific evidence. You can't introduce that. So, in the end, I was the only one that could testify on my own behalf. So, that's what I did for about 2 solid hours. I stayed on the stand. But I never thought for a moment that there would be any way that they would convict me because some of the members of that jury actually had family members that I treated for nothing. And they healed them. So how could this jury find me guilty? But anyway, we made our closing arguments and then finally we left and it was like only 3 hours later, the jury retired then, but 3 hours later they called us back to the courthouse. And they said, the jury had reached their verdict. So I go into the courtroom, and Monica McQueen, a very insidious woman, believe me. Mm-hmm. But she was the prosecutor from the Justice Department. Okay. She's the one that did all the talking during the charter challenge, and she's also the one that did all the talking during the Supreme Court case. But Judge Shatford, the Crown prosecutor from Amherst, he was always, right beside her. But when I entered the courtroom, when I looked, she was there, but Shatford was missing. Mm-hmm. So I didn't think anything about it. I sat down, and I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 minutes later, in comes Shatford. He sits down, and then it was about maybe a minute later, the jury come in. So I stood up, and I was thinking, we're going to win this. Right. Everybody else thought the same. And then all of a sudden, it was guilty, guilty, guilty. And I looked at the jury and I looked at her and I said, guilty of what? Yeah. Well, healing people? Is that really a crime here in Canada? What's wrong with you people? And then the judge, Mr. Simpson, you can't take this personally, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I looked at the judge and I said, listen, pal, you better lock me up right now. Because I said, the minute I get out of here, I'm going to go right back to providing that oil or extract until I'm sentenced. Mm-hmm. The judge never said a word. You know, I got up, left the courtroom, and it was just blew me away.
Yeah.
And then the next day, a lady that had been present in the court, she came to, they contacted me, and she said, I seen Doug Shatford, the Crown prosecutor, leaving the jury room just before the jury came in with your verdict. And I mean, that's jury tampering.
Yeah.
So I told her, I said, this is a very serious charge. So I said, I want you to go back to that courtroom and sit in exactly the same place you sat. And I said, I want you to look down, because they had one door open. And they're stupid these people are. I mean, they're just that arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
But they had left one door open, the door into the courtroom, and she could see down the hall. So she went back to the courthouse, and back down the same day, her and her husband. She said, Rick, from where I was sitting, there was only one doorway visible, and that was the jury room door. So we contacted the judge, told him about all of this, and thought, oh, okay, something will happen. So about 2 weeks later, we get this call to come to the Amherst courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know I thought it was for a meeting of some kind.
Right.
So me and Margaret Dwyer and her husband Rick, he came with us. So we go to the courthouse, and if we walk into the courtroom, and there's the judge sitting on the same judge, Cascione.
Right.
And here's the two prosecutors, and now they're represented by some pasty-faced lawyer from Halifax. And
Okay.
what is this?
Right.
So, and as soon as we walked in, the judge looked at Mrs. Dwyer, because she's the one who witnessed this, and this is how they threaten people. He said, if we find anything you say here today to be untrue, you could be facing 14 years in prison.
Right.
But this woman, I mean, she's just a rock. Margaret just laughed at him. She said, look, I'm here to tell the truth. So she got on the stand, and then this lawyer for the prosecutors, he come at her in every which way he could.
Right.
And, she just fended him off. He even stated at one point, the only reason that she was doing this, was because if I went to jail, then she would lose her supplier. And she just laughed at him, and she said, do you actually think that Rick Simpson is the only person in Canada that ever grew pot?
Right.
What an idiot.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, they couldn't disprove a thing she had said, because this woman was telling the truth. So anyway, after about a half an hour, 20 minutes to a half an hour, they let her off the stand. And my turn then, I guess.
Right.
So I called Doug Shatford, the Crown prosecutor, to the stand. And see, like through my activities, I'd come to know practically all the growers and dealers in that local area.
Okay.
So two of these dealers had told me that they had sold cannabis to Doug Shatford, the Crown prosecutor. So Shatford's on the stand, and I said, sir, could you tell us about your use of cannabis? And he got all red in the face, and he started sputtering and spitting, and then the judge jumped right in.
Yeah.
Well, that line of questioning will not be tolerated.
Yeah.
That's
irrelevant.
Their lawyer asked Mrs. Dwyer, why can't I ask him the same questions? The whole thing was just fixed from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was two flunkies that worked in the courthouse there, and they both got up and testified that Shatford wasn't in the jury room. But of course, if they didn't, then they would have lost their jobs.
Right.
They? The whole thing was just pathetic. And then at the end, the judge said, I think this is something that you and Mrs. Dwyer just cooked up to derail your sentencing.
Of course.
Unbelievable. But the strange thing, at the sentencing, when I went to that damn sentencing, there was about 35 or 40 supporters came that day. And that don't often happen in that area.
Right.
It's small towns. And so they actually, the first time I think that they ever used metal detectors in the Amherst courthouse. They put us all through metal detectors, and I'd never heard of that before, not in that area. And these legal eagles were actually afraid, to some degree, because they knew what they were doing was totally wrong, and so did all my supporters. But it was so stupid. And I got up. The judge said, he said, under different circumstances, Mr. Simpson would be winning awards for his work.
Right.
But this is the court of law, and we don't give out awards here.
You're right.
Oh yeah, praise the Lord.
Yeah.
And then but then he turns right around and he says, in my 34 years in the legal system, I've never seen a case like this. There was no criminal intent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what was I doing in this stupid court system? You know, they knew that right from the beginning.
Yeah.
I was giving this away for God's sakes, and I was contacting everyone I could possibly contact, you know, to get it recognition. And then, you know, and then even though, like during the trial, the judge wouldn't allow the, you know, the patients on the stand. He wouldn't allow the scientific evidence to be introduced.
Mm-hmm.
This judge came right out and stated, he said, the scientific evidence does exist to back up everything Mr. Simpson is saying. And he said he also has this large body of evidence with these patients that also back his position.
Mm-hmm.
So there was I was telling him was the truth.
Right.
You know, hey, we got the greatest medicine on the planet at our disposal, and this court case went on like it meant nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just astounded.
Flabbergasted.
Really. And then I forget, I think the Crown wanted me to go to jail for 2 or 3 years or something.
Wow.
I'm not sure now. But, you know, it's really up to the judge's own discretion. Actually,
Sure.
I could have went to jail for 12 years.
Damn.
You know, so anyway, the judge said, what was it? How did I go? Oh yeah, it went on. He said, I'll spare you the indignity of a DNA sample.
Okay.
And now what was the? Oh yeah, he said a couple stupid things like that. But in the end, they gave me a $2,000 fine and a gun restriction.
Mm.
And the only reason I got a gun restriction was there were no firearms involved in any of the raids the RCMP
Right.
ever conducted. So, but if you're convicted of trafficking, automatically that comes with a gun restriction.
Correct.
Unbelievable. So, I mean, there was many guns in my house during those raids, but it was the ones the RCMP were waving around. You know?
Yeah.
I think that's what presented the danger. So, but anyway, they gave me a $2,000 fine and this stupid gun restriction. And, I mean, I was really, at that point, I was just totally disillusioned with Canada. You know?
Yeah.
What's wrong with these people? So I started looking for other countries, you know, that I could go to and you know, get on with my research and, you know, and bring this out. So, but the problem was, I mean, the people just kept coming. You know, I had so many followers then, you know, and they would tell their friends who were sick, and then the next thing they'd be at my door. And,
Right.
you know, I mean, it was the day after the court case. We get finished up and everything. And then it was just early in the morning, I don't know, it was 7 o'clock in the morning, there was somebody beating on my door, you know, with tears in their eyes.
Right.
Well, my heart really wasn't in it the way it should have been, but anyway, I kept supplying. And then I remember one day my son and I were talking, and I was talking about something going to South America, and he started laughing at me. And I said, so what's so funny?
Right.
He said, Dad, he said, he said, I know you. He said, you're going to stay here and fight these people until you win. And I thought, you know, and then I started laughing, and that kind of brought me back to normal. So for almost 2 years, they never bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just went ahead and did what I did. You know, the patients were just coming and going like you wouldn't believe. You know, there was often 5, 6 cars in my yard.
Right.
But so in 2009, I again openly planted another crop in my backyard. This time, the RCMP didn't touch it.
Okay.
Strange as that.
Surprising, yeah.
And, but I did a speaking tour in the Czech Republic in 2009, and then in October, and then just 3 weeks after I got back, I had to go back to Amsterdam to do a lecture at the Cannabis Cup.
Okay.
And they were going to make me Freedom Fighter of the Year, which is what they did, but the year before I was crowned Freedom Fighter, or the day before, I got word from Canada that I'd been raided again.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know, what is this? You know, and I was hearing that, there were 70 pounds of cannabis found in my home, restricted firearms, booby traps.
Wow.
You know, they were trying to make me sound like...
Now they're throwing all sorts of stuff in there, yeah.
You know, I mean, the only gun that was in my home when I left for Europe was a child's pellet gun. Which
Right.
is perfectly legal for any 10-year-old to buy.
Exactly.
You know, no restricted weapons, no booby traps, and certainly no 70 pounds of cannabis. I mean, I had been broke into twice now, over the years. And now, would a man like me go to Europe for a week and leave 70 pounds of cannabis laying around?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that don't make much sense. So I knew that at that point, I thought, well, the RCMP were sent in there to frame me so they can bring up these false charges. You see, because I was getting so many followers in Canada that I was becoming a real big thorn in the Canadian government's backside.
Right.
Because they knew I was right.
Right.
And so I think they just staged this whole thing in the hope that it would keep me out of the country.
Getting too popular and too much noise and got to keep it quiet.
Yeah. So anyway, that's exactly what it did. That was the effect it had. I stayed out of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew if I went back, I already knew how the corruption of the legal system. I mean, they'd have put me in jail forever, and then they denied me the use of the medicine, and pretty soon, then Rick Simpson died in prison.
Right.
So anyway, I just stayed over here in Europe, and then I started traveling from country to country. And I continued doing seminars and lectures about this subject, and I exposed the Canadian government to all these different, the people of all these different nations. And I have no regrets about that. So anyway, this went on, like for 3 years. And then all of a sudden I got word that the charges that they had brought against me had been withdrawn.
Okay.
So I did go back to Canada in 2013 or late 2012, and I stayed, for a few months, or quite a few months. But I have to say that, I was no longer even comfortable in my own country.
Mm-hmm.
I it was so strange. It's just like everywhere I looked, all I seen was corruption. And then I go talk to the people. I knew so many people in the surrounding towns and these areas. And I would talk to them, and they'd all say the same thing. Rick, we know it works. And I said, well, why don't you do something about it?
Right.
They're all afraid of their government and the police.
Yeah.
They say Canada's a police state. That's no damn joke, brother.
Yeah, Michigan, the United States, we're getting that way too, it looks like. And that's quite an amazing turn of events for a guy who was just trying to, look at something that he found intriguing that could possibly heal his own cancer. It took you on quite the journey that you probably didn't ever expect.
Oh, never. I mean, if somebody had told me 20 years ago that all this was going to happen, I would have laughed at them.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the greatest pleasures I had during this whole experience was just getting to know Jack Hare.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine.
Well, Jack he's a wonderful man, and as far as I'm concerned, Jack is my hero. I mean, there's no question. I mean, he put out the book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and I never met Jack face to face. But we spent hundreds of hours talking to each other on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
We were truly birds of a feather. And
right.
And Jack told me himself. He said the minute I watched Run from the Cure, he said it was like being run over by a truck.
Mm.
And he said with my knowledge of this plant, he said I can't believe that I didn't see this before. And actually he's quite right, because if you look at the older editions. The 11th edition and before, if you look at those editions, I don't know about the 12th edition. I'm not sure what's in that one. I know it's downsized quite a bit.
Right.
But if you look under the medical section, it actually says it right in there. Cannabis was used to treat tumors.
Right.
So this was right under Jack's nose, for years. And Jack and I, we both knew that, the cannabis or hemp movement, they've been running around for years, blowing smoke in people's faces to get this legalized. Well, that didn't work.
Right.
And then they put all that money behind NORML, which is controlled now, I guess, by lawyers. And what good did that ever do?
Yeah.
So it was kind of a comedy. I know one night Jack called me. He was going on about the initiatives they had planned for California, and Jack had his own set of initiatives. So about a half an hour after listening to what Jack said, he said to me, he said, well, what do you think, of these initiatives, Rick? And I said, well, Jack, if it was me, I'd just throw them all in a trash can.
Mm.
I said, why do you need initiatives to get rid of a law that doesn't exist? And I said, why haven't all those legal eagles, that are with NORML, why haven't they been able to get rid of this law? Because, I said, people like you and I said, and anyone else that studies this subject, I said, knows that for a fact that these laws were put in place with the use of nothing more than corruption. It's all based on lies and propaganda. Nothing more. These are not real laws. And that's the only time I ever talked to Jack that he didn't have an answer. He just changed the subject.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because it's kind of like, can't speak about the elephant in the room, and it's kind of you know, a guy like Jack Hare, you know, a person that's as outspoken as yourself now, you know, a decade ago, it's just kind of, you know, ironic in a way to think that, you know, even at that point, even deep in the community, there are certain taboo subjects. And, you know, how can we get past this if we can't talk about the full breadth of everything?
Well, no, that's right. I mean, I don't know. People tend to look at me like I'm some kind of big hero or something, but, you know, I'm just an ordinary man. And all I really consider myself to be is the messenger, you know, about all of this. You know, I realized back in 2003, you know, because I have like 3 children of my own, and I have 3 grandchildren. And I realized that, you know, at that time, that if this medicine is not available, then they don't have much of a future.
They're going to be victim.
Yeah, so I just actually, I mean, after going through all the proper channels and then doing nothing, then I took my case to the public. I mean, we put up the PhoenixCures.ca website back in 2004. And that gave people all the information about how they could heal themselves, you know, the proper strains to use, you know, the dosage instructions. It was all been there.
No,
you
it's
know,
a wonderful
since that
site.
time. And then in 2008, we brought out the documentary Run From the Cure. And I honestly think that had something to do with me not going to jail, too. Because we brought that out about 2 weeks before I was sentenced. And believe me, that documentary started making a lot of people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, because now that documentary's now been viewed by hundreds of millions all over the world.
Right.
You know, it's been played here in Europe and everywhere now. So it you know, it drew a lot of attention to this cause. And I think that Christian Lorette did a great job when, you know, when he put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's been, you know, here in the States, it's been, you know, well received and well played throughout many communities, not just the cannabis community, but medical communities as well. Still viewed with, you know, by the established system, you know, with a lot of skepticism, and by people who still believe the established system is right. But, you know, what we're finding today is, yeah, that one video has been kind of a watershed moment in the conversation of this. So I thank you and everybody else who was involved in that, because that seems to be, in my opinion, one of the things that turned this tide as far as the discussions, how deep you can have them. Because before, they were all limited to recreational and punishment.
Well, it's nice to see things, you know, progressing the way they are, you know, now. But, you know, it was a culmination of many different things, like, you know, like the website, Run From the Cure, the documentary, you know, and slowly, you know, people finally started to catch on.
Absolutely.
You know, but it took, you know, a great deal of time. You know, like when I first discovered all this, I thought we'd have this medicine out in a year.
Right.
You know, and here it is over 12 years later, and you know, we're you know, like it's wonderful to see all of these countries now legalizing the medicinal use. But from what I see, they're all going about, all the governments are going about everything in totally the wrong way.
Yeah.
There's only one thing to do here, and that's to repeal all of these absurd laws worldwide.
Absolutely.
Turn that plant free. You know, we all have the right, we all have a natural right to use this plant to heal ourselves. We used it all through history. Some of the greatest healers in history used this plant. You know, and it's well documented.
Absolutely.
And honestly, I firmly believe that Jesus Christ himself used the healing power of cannabis.
Yeah.
Because if you look up the ingredients of the holy anointing oil, it's right there. And, you know, back at that time, they called cannabis bud canna blossom.
Right.
And that is one of the major ingredients of the holy anointing oil. And that means that the holy anointing oil was full of the same healing cannabinoids that are in the oils that I produce.
Right.
So, you know, it might not have been the power of God.
Well, and in that aspect, there's, you know, the contention is cannabism was originally translated into Latin and was translated into calamus, which is a different plant. Now the question is, was that done purposefully, or was that just a faux pas in translation of the time? And with looking at history, it's almost hard to see it could have been an accident, because when you really look at it, if, you know, in that the amount of calamus, it's been estimated that if cannabism was calamus, the amount used would be toxic to a person. which means if somebody tried to make the holy anointing oil after Yeshua or Jesus or Emmanuel, however you want to claim them, you'd probably be poisoning somebody and not healing them. So, I'm looking at that and saying, yeah, you're absolutely right, because the scholars are now saying cannabism is cannabis, not calamus. But they're trying to say, oh, it was just a simple mistake in translation. I don't think so.
No,
if you accept that, then you got to understand this is 2,000-year-old lie, or at least what we believe is 2,000-year-old lie.
Well, I mean, our religions have had a lot to do with hiding the truth, as far as I'm concerned, because, I mean, cannabis was, well, the first writings about cannabis was in 2800 BC China.
Right.
2,800 years before the time of Christ.
Right, that's 5,000 years today.
Ayurvedic medicine in India. Basically, this medicine is based on cannabis and other healing plants, but cannabis was always one of the main plants.
Right.
Now, this goes back 1,500 years before Jesus was even born.
Right, and that's 3,500 years before us. Exactly.
So it was no secret, but it seems to me that conveniently, like hundreds of years after these events about the crucifixion and everything were supposed to have occurred, and then they start, all these different scholars, start putting all of these scriptures together, and giving us what they call the Bible. And I know a lot of those scriptures are actually missing.
Right. There's a lot of things missing out of there.
It's all subject to interpretation, and I think that they actually believed that it would be in the best interest of religion to actually make people believe that it was the power of God that they needed to heal them. And I mean, this is about all I can say with religion.
Well, I mean, yeah.
I'm a religion myself. I worship the hemp plant, and believe me, that keeps me busy enough.
Right. I mean, yeah, if you look at it in the idea of, if you want to control people, then you have to give them a reason to come to you for control. And if the idea is spirituality or religion, then you got to go to the spiritual guy to get your understanding. So yeah, I mean, it just set up a hierarchy control of all the information's held by this small little group, and they give it all, and of course they're the paper-trained group, so they must be right.
Well, I mean, they think they have the right. I mean, well, look at what they're doing in Codex Alimentarius, the outlawing of the natural, for God's sake.
Right.
Look at Monsanto, genetically modifying our food supply for our benefit.
Yeah.
Like hell.
Yeah, they had the whole idea that,
the whole pushing for the vaccines. And we all know, like, hey, the rates of autism have gone up 10,000 times since these big vaccine programs went in place.
Right.
It's pretty obvious what's causing it.
Yeah. But the white coats say no. It's this whole, that's why I called my show The Perception Deception, because everything's been kind of, askew of what reality is, but not so far askew that we can't accept it as reality. Our perceptions have been just slightly deceived by that very little bit of information, or the omission of information is usually the case. And that leaves people with this idea that, okay, I don't know anything, so I got to appeal to this person to know that subject because they're trained in that subject, and this, leads us looking to other people to know what we should already know, easily within ourselves,
Well, I mean, the first thing we do when we want to know something, who do we go to? We go to an expert.
Right.
All right, I've done medical conferences, many of them here in Europe, with the top experts in the world in this field. Who's listening?
Right.
Why are these laws taking so long to change? Why aren't we using these oils? We should have been using these extracts long ago. But they just drag their feet, on the sound. They're going on like it needs more study, it needs this, it needs that. All we need to do is open the damn door, start growing this plant everywhere, use it in every conceivable way, of course, including medicine.
Correct.
I mean, it's the answer. We should be living in a hemp-based economy. It could end starvation.
Yeah.
It could end, it could actually end our dependency on fossil fuels in no time.
Yeah.
This plant, the ability of this plant to produce fuel is just out of this world.
Exactly.
1,800 gallons off of 1 acre, 1,800 gallons of ethanol.
That's huge.
So an acre is not very big. So when you look at all the benefits, but the main thing is we have to realize that plants like cannabis were simply outlawed because they were a huge threat to all of these big, ugly industries that are killing our planet.
Right.
Cannabis is earth-friendly. It's not like, like right now we've got all this CO2 levels going right through the roof. Well, why is that? It's because we're burning fossil fuels that, have had all that CO2 contained within them in the ground for hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and then we bring it to the surface and burn it, so our CO2 levels go up.
Right.
Big surprise.
Well, not only that, the deforestation, cutting down the trees for wood products and paper, and scorched earth policies through the wars where there's nothing that can grow for 100 years. And we got this. And even on that whole line has been the way it's been put to the people coming out of the World Health Organization and the World weather organizations of this global warming. That's half deception and lie. Because in the last 15 years we've actually went down in temperature and not up. That's why they had to stop saying global warming and change to climate change. Well, I'm in Michigan. You're from Canada. We only have to wait 5 minutes for the climate to change.
Yeah, you're right about that, brother.
Rick, we've got to...
They're conning the public in so many different ways, and and we just go through life, and most of us never take the time to stop and even think about it.
Right.
But see, this is one of the other things you're scared of with cannabis too. Is like, even from smoking cannabis, that can get you questioning things.
Makes you...
when you're taking this oil, it works big time in that direction.
Yeah, the fog goes away.
It makes you wonder, what's holding this together? And then in the end, when you really connect all the dots, you see that it's these great big money interests, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Warburgs, these mega-rich banking families. They're the ones that are really running our earth. And they're really the ones that are in control of practically all the big industries. They control our governments, from the shadows. They control the mass media, the medical system, what the medical system supplies, because they own the pharmaceutical companies, or they own controlling interests.
Or they own the colleges.
The chemical factories, it just defies description that they're getting away with this. There's James Corbett. I admire his work greatly. I believe James is a Canadian too.
Yeah.
But if you watch the Corbett Report, episode 286, it's called Rockefeller Medicine.
Right.
If you watch that, it will explain very plainly to you why we have this rotten medical system we have today. And there's also other documentaries out there like the Marketing of Madness.
Right.
If you watch that, you might want to never take another pill. There's so many things now coming out. There's another one out there now called Drug Lord. That's about New Zealand and what they're going through. Very well done documentary. There's so much information now. But the part that bothers me the worst is the way these governments are behaving. Like we got hundreds, or actually thousands, I think now, of people that have gone up on YouTube and put up videos, telling the whole world this is what they use, this oil. It cured their cancer, it cured their MS. It's just endless what this works on: diabetes, chronic pain, arthritis, and but the government said, well, we should disregard that.
It's anecdotal evidence because there's no paper-trained, stamp of approval on it.
The proper research hasn't been done.
Right.
Well, these people all had documented serious medical conditions. Now, if it wasn't the cannabis oil that cured them or controlled their diseases, then what was it?
Yeah.
So they say like human trials. There's been a human trial going along ever since 2003.
Yeah.
And I think it's people that were fortunate enough to acquire the proper oil, and they have had wonderful results. But at the present time, everybody and his dog is supplying what they say is the real Rick Simpson oil.
Right.
And I'm not involved with any of these people. I don't know what strains they're using. There's thousands of different strains, and they all vary in their medical qualities. So I have no idea, what oil is being supplied. And I wish my name wasn't involved with it at all.
Right.
But it was Jack Hare that started all that because Jack started calling these extracts the Rick Simpson Oil.
Right.
And I even had a kind of an argument with Jack one night. I said, Jack, why are you attaching my name? It's hemp oil. And then Jack just said, well, aren't you Rick Simpson? But that was Jack Hare.
Right.
But that caught on. So then my name became directly associated with this. I mean, if you go on the internet, you'll see all kinds of sites up there.
Right.
Rick Simpson. Well, the only real site I have is phoenixtears.ca. That's the only site that I'm affiliated with. I do have one official Facebook page, although there's others up there that claim to be me and they're not.
Right.
There's no real policing on the internet.
Right.
I do have 2 books available on this subject, on my website. Yeah, they're available. Both of them are available in ebook versions. And actually, my first book, Phoenix Cures the Rick Simpson Story, that's available in printed copy too. So, and this is what I'm using to actually carry on with this crusade. It's just the funding I receive from book sales.
Right.
But unfortunately, many people have no regard for copyright laws, and the minute the books went up as ebooks, other people started making them available for nothing. And I'm glad that the information is spreading. That's wonderful in that way, but still it robs me of the funding I need, like, I said, to carry this crusade on.
Right.
And to do something, to give me some money to do some future research. So it's been kind of very much like beating your head against the wall.
Right. Yeah, and I'd like to, for anybody that's going to catch this on our, archive past, I'm going to get it edited down and put it on the show live tonight, I'm hoping. And then it'll be on archive too. So anybody out there listening, please do your due diligence. Go look, find Rick's site at phoenixtears.ca. Or, I believe it's Rick Simpson Official on Facebook.
Yes, it's Rick Simpson Official, yeah.
Yep.
The link is right there on my website anyway.
Excellent, yeah. And if you are interested in this, go take the time and actually buy the book directly from Rick. It's going to do him the most benefit. You're going to get all the information you need, but it's going to help keep him going and with the fight that he's been kind of logged into. You seem like the unwilling warrior that you didn't want to get into this. It just every time you tried to do something right, the system said you were wrong, and it just drove you harder.
Yeah, that's basically what happened.
Sometimes the best warriors are the unwilling ones because they know they have the most to fight for, but they understand the reason why they fight. They just don't fight to do it.
Well, people just have to get it through their heads that no one ever had the right to outlaw this plant in the first place.
Absolutely.
Everyone on this earth, we're the ones that own this plant, not some government or drug company.
Right.
And how dare they tell us, well, you need a license, or they have all these regulations in place. This is truly disturbing. And when you see what's happening right now in the U.S., they're turning this into a cash cow.
Oh, big time.
30% tax. Hey, that's a great idea. Make the medicinal users, pay to foot the bill.
Right.
For all of these criminal activities. And in my mind, there's only one way to deal with this, is to take all of these, mega rich families that have been causing us all this grief, take them right into a common law court and make them admit their guilt. Because it's more than obvious what they've been doing is all based on their greed. These people are behaving like psychopaths.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Anyway, make them admit their guilt, take their wealth and power away, and leave them enough money to live out their lives. Hopefully, get them on the oil. Maybe that'll help with their thinking a bit.
Sure.
And then take all of that money and resources. And then I honestly believe, I don't believe in this new world order nonsense. But I think it is time that we had like a world council. Representatives from every region sitting on an open council, representing their people, with an open book policy.
Right.
Put the resources that these mega rich individuals now have into the hands of this council, and let them distribute this wealth all over the world, and make the world a better place for everyone. And at the same time, we grow cannabis. We replace all of these fossil fuels and all this nonsense. We start doing things in an earth-friendly way. You know, they go on right now about depopulating the planet. Well, we don't need to depopulate this planet.
Right.
We could have twice the population we have, and we still have lots more that, you know, that we could feed. You know, it's just that our planet is being so badly mismanaged.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know, like to me, there's only one answer, and that's to go back and basically go back to a hemp-based economy. You know, use we do have a great deal of modern technology that, you know, is earth-friendly and could be very useful. But we have to get away from all of these technologies, you know, that are, you know, poisoning the planet. And we have to put an end to these idiotic wars that are going on. You know, I mean, we've been fighting wars for thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
You know, where has it ever got us?
Rich men sending the, you know, poor man's son off to do his whim.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to fight a war, you know, these people, you know, these warmongers, if they want to go fight a war, well, like, you know, give President Obama a gun, give Stephen Harper a gun, send them.
Well, back
you know, I think it's time that we grew up. You know, I mean, we always say we learn from our mistakes. Well, how long is it going to take us before we realize that war is a mistake?
Yeah.
These wars are not being fought over right and wrong.
Right.
It's all about resources, money, and power. And
Well,
who's behind these wars?
Yeah.
Actually, the Rothschild family, they say for the last 200 years, the Rothschild banking concerns have funded both sides of every major conflict that has taken place.
Yes, and there's documented proof of that. Yeah, there's documented evidence of that right back to the Napoleonic War, that they funded Napoleon, and then the brothers of the Rothschild, or the cousins of the Rothschilds, funded the French, or whoever it was Napoleon was fighting against. I don't remember, it was British or the French monarchy. But yeah, I mean, they've been the backside. Same thing with the Civil War here in the United States. It's now coming to, you know, pretty common knowledge for anybody that want to look, that the Rothschild family was the money behind the British East India Trade Company and Holdings. Interesting acronym, BEITCH, BEITCH, British East India Trade Company and Holdings. Its original, the bitch was back. Was done that. But yeah, they not only funded the British East India Trade Company, which ran much of the slave trade, coming, you know, bringing the slaves from Africa into the southern states to be slaves. They also funded the banks in the southern states that were giving the loans to the plantations, and they were the money behind the North.
Well, you know, these statesmen that, you know, the history is recorded basically as being such wonderful patriots and heroes, you know, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, you know, Abe Lincoln, Benjamin Franklin, you know, the list goes on and on. You know, but, you know, these same people were all involved with cannabis in a big way. And today, if most of those people were alive today, these statesmen that we're supposed to have so much respect for, they would be called potheads.
Yeah.
This is so stupid. I mean, these are the same people that wrote the things like, you know, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. Read these documents, for God's sakes. Look at what they say.
Exactly.
You know, these people were deep thinkers. But the problem is right now in the U.S., you know, the governments have shredded the Constitution.
Yes, they
That's
have.
the reason America is in the situation it's in. I mean, just a few short decades ago, America was the greatest country in the world. And now it's going down the drain.
Big time.
And guess who put it there?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that, you know, we're kind of seeing that, you know, in a micro scale now in our local areas and communities. You know, I'm in the state of Michigan, which is one of 52, they say, or 50 of them, however many they want to count with territories today. But, you know, like you were saying earlier, you know, this idea of our founders, you know, back then, you know, I wanted to bring in, if they had disagreements between people, they took it up between the people. The only person we really went to war with at that time as a group was the King of England, because he was in England and he wouldn't come here to fight. So yeah, but you know, back then those guys had duels. They had pistol duels against each other. They didn't send their neighbors' kids to go duel. They dueled themselves. I mean, that's how Jackson almost died fighting the banks, with a duel with one of the guys from the banks, and you know, he ended up surviving. But yeah, I mean, this whole system, you know, is not what it was founded on even a couple hundred years ago.
Oh no, and we were warned of that fact.
Absolutely.
I mean, Eisenhower, he made a speech talking about the military-industrial complex and the danger they presented, and then Kennedy made a similar speech, you know, just a while before he was shot and killed.
2 weeks, I think it was, when he gave his secret society speech.
Yeah, I mean, so you know, these presidents, you know, seeing the danger that these mega rich people and how they had maneuvered, you know, into basically being the shadow government.
Right.
They seen the danger there, and they were talking about it.
Yeah,
But, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, Kennedy well, I think all presidents, everyone has their flaws. But I really think that John Kennedy was the last president that the United States actually had, because what came after that were nothing but criminals for the most part.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when I look at Nixon, you know, when Nixon went into power, he formed the Schaefer Commission
Right.
to determine, you know, what should be done about cannabis. You know,
The cannabis problem.
Yeah, the cannabis problem. But when the Schaefer Commission came back and said they didn't, you know, they said that, you know, to legalize this plant once more. And
Right.
they didn't even consider it to be a narcotic. You know, Tricky Dicky takes the same report that he had ordered and throws it in the trash can.
Yep.
And then, you know, a short time later, he starts the war on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And what does his war on drugs focus on?
Cannabis.
Cannabis.
Right.
You know, the very plant he was told to legalize. I mean, what
Yeah.
a racket.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because when you look at the same situation, you know, things going on at the same time, that was within a year or so of them starting the war on cancer.
Well, that
Yep.
same study I talked about, you know, the Medical School of Virginia study
Mhm.
that I heard on the radio that day.
Right.
You know, back in around 74, 75, I think. 74,
Right.
75. And, I mean, everybody was involved in cannabis research, knew about this. They all had to know. You know, and I mean, it's a known fact now that, I mean, the Canadian or the American government have known about this since at least that time, because they were the ones that shut the study down as soon as they found out that the cannabinoids were killing cancer.
Exactly.
So, you know, so the American government has been hiding the truth from their own people and the rest of the world for 40 years now.
Since at least 1975. Yep, 40 years for sure.
And the American government themselves, just a couple months after I started making all this noise, all of a sudden, guess who's got patents in place? Medical patents on the plant that they say has no medicinal value. Well, that would be the American government themselves. They
That's
put it in
right.
place in 2003.
Yep, there's 7 of them today for sure.
Oh, you know, it's just pathetic, you know, patenting, you know, with patents on a plant. You know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, like they said, set the plant free. We have to, right now, this whole industry is in a total sham. It's a mess. You know, you've got
Being
so
co-opted.
many different seed companies. They all, you know, many of these companies supply the same strains with the same name.
Right.
You know, like you might order blueberries from 5 different seed companies. But when you got those seeds and you grew them, you would find out that you're growing 5 different varieties of the cannabis plant.
Mm.
You know, and again, their medical values differ. See, there's very little stability in this. So, you know, what we need is to do some research, you know, with the most medicinal strains on earth, then determine which ones work the best, you know, for what conditions.
Categorize them.
Yeah, categorize them. And then, you know, make them available to the public, you know, or medicinal users at a reasonable cost. And, you know, I think if they turn this free, then in a very short time we could perfect this medicine to a much higher level.
I agree.
And in a short time, I think we could determine, you know, exactly what cannabinoid levels are required to fight each and every illness in the most effective way. You know, it's all simple, basically process of elimination.
Right.
You know, and I already know how to make oils now using no solvents at all.
Okay.
You know, and actually, this evolves into something I call super oils.
Okay.
Because I have produced oils that were so strong using this method that actually I couldn't believe it. I mean,
Really?
I was used to strong extracts.
Right.
I was producing these oils from some of the very best strains, you know, available. But when I used this new process and produced the oils in a different way, it was like unbelievable, the difference. It was, I would say, maybe 4 to 5 times stronger.
Wow.
You know, just a little bit of this is very effective. So it's, you know, the only bad thing is it'll get you high too.
Right. Well, I mean, therein again lies, even in this community, this, you know, hardcore educated or getting educated, becoming learned cannabis community, this idea of the CBD only. You know, the CBD only. You know, there's so many people who are somewhat educated and learned, and then there's quite a few people who are, and they're still pushing the CBD only idea. And, you know, it's just kind of funny.
The American Cancer Institute, just recently, they released a new report backing up basically everything I've been saying.
Yes.
Although they haven't gone far enough yet, but they're saying THC, the cancer killer.
Yes.
You know, and they're hitting a whole bunch of different things. This is the American Cancer Institute.
Right. Because,
so why is nobody listening?
well, the people that are listening are the people who are setting up the pharmaceutical industry to take it all over. You know, that's the point.
That's not going to happen. I mean, this is exactly what these governments are trying to do. Even the governments that are legalizing what they say, the medicinal use. They're not saying why they're legalizing the medicinal use. You know, it's these oils that are causing it, the healing power of these extracts. That's the reason they're legalizing it.
Right.
But they still don't want the public to have the freedom to grow and produce these plants and produce their own extract.
Yep. Regulations are about controlling competition and entrepreneurship and controlling the market itself. I mean, that's all regulations can ever do, is control what you know, try to control what we do. You know,
as I said, I mean, no one has the right to control it.
To funnel it into a certain process that they are ultimate, you know, rulers over. And by they, I mean those in government or those in the big money or those at the top of these companies, you know, the people running this little game. But yeah, I mean, that's, you know, where I'd like to go with the rest of this is, you know, this position of how it got here, you know, and, you know, we're all aware of the issues that we have. Everybody sees them, you know, everybody knows about the arrests, they know about the healing abilities of the kids, at least in the community, I want to say everybody. A lot of people outside the community don't realize that yet. But those people that are inside and have been paying attention, they realize this. But yet they still acquiesce in the idea that we need government to fix it for us because they're the ones that fix government. And, you know, it's just this insane loop that I'm trying to hopefully get my fellow Michiganders to break, because in 2016 we're going to be asked to do something. The state's going to do something whether we care or not. The state's moving right now to take over everything, even on the medical side now, because they just passed some bills out of committee that are coming out. Well, they came out last week to be voted on, that if they go through the House and the Senate and get signed in, it'll be basically a nearly pharmaceutical takeover of the medical law we have in the state, but we'll still be allowed to be a patient and grow our own or have a caregiver. But I see what they're doing in other states. They're trying to phase that out. So I see that coming here. You know, they're going to do this, baby step, let's take it over, but we'll let them have this, and then a couple years down the line we'll start taking their ability to grow back, because they're already framing things up with that kind of, you know, eyesight, and, you know, the headlines are like, okay, this is, you know, it's unregulated, you don't know if you're going to get real RSO or fake RSO, you know, leading right back to what you're saying with your name being tagged on it. So, I mean, there's a dichotomy here that still certain people think that government's going to fix it. And that's the part I have a problem with, because government's what got us here. Yeah, government is what put us in this position, sadly. And we've allowed it.
Today. You know, like, people are afraid of their governments. It should be just the opposite. The government should be afraid of the people. You know, but you know, for some reason, it's this whole illusion we're living in is so damn twisted now. You know, but I mean, the government is supposed to be working for us, not against us.
Right.
It's so obvious that this corruption, you know, basically everywhere we look, we see it, and we all know it exists. And, you know, and corruption is really a crime against everyone. Right. But no one's doing anything to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, through my podcast and out in my, you know, work, because I see other things. I'm not just a cannabis consumer or a what I'll call a patient. You know, I pay attention to kind of what's going on. You know, we got this idea of this new world order that you mentioned, and you know, it's funny because you can discuss this, and it's almost like the cannabis topic itself. You know, some people understand it. Some people know the facts.
Yeah.
Some people, you know, heard about it and believe, oh, that's just got to be craziness. That can't happen. That's not real life. That's TV. Cannabis Cures Cancer. Oh, that only happens on TV. There's a New World Order. Oh, that's only in the movies.
Yeah.
But then we've got the last 5 presidents who have sat in front of the state, the country, the Congress, and the United Nations and mentioned the very thing: we need a new world order, the rule of man above the rule of nature. And George H.W. Bush.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing that. But you see, with me, I challenge people. When I do these lectures and conferences, I always tell the audience the same thing. Look, you don't have to believe a word I'm saying. And I said, I would prefer if you didn't. It's just a matter if I would like you to prove me wrong.
Right.
Simply go out, get about 30 grams of good quality bud, produce the oil from it, preferably from an indica strain, produce the oil, and use that oil and give it to somebody who has a diabetic ulcer that won't heal, third-degree burn, or skin cancer, or psoriasis, anything like that. Apply the oil, put a bandage on, wait 3 days, and then reapply the oil, put another bandage on until it heals. Watch what happens. Anybody can prove it. This is what they can't defeat. So governments right now, they're pushing for their buddies in the pharmaceutical industry and a bunch of other organizations, that are in their back pocket.
Right.
They're pushing for them to control this. Well, that's not going to happen because they're going to want a fortune for anything they give us, to start with. And then on top of that, see, drug companies are used to return business.
Right.
They don't want to give you a drug that'll actually heal you. They want to give you a drug that you've got to come back and get more of every month.
Right.
That's the name of the game with the drug industry. So I think it's highly unlikely that they would ever supply the public with any high quality oils at a reasonable cost.
The general public.
Honesty, if these governments were actually working for us, they could have big government farms, production facilities. They could be growing the most medicinal strains in the world. This oil is very, very cheap to produce. I've always said that if they turn me loose, I could produce high quality, a full cancer treatment, a full 60 milliliter treatment of the highest quality oil you can imagine for $100.
Right.
They could even make it,
cheap.
Governments were doing their job, they could even make it available on a donation basis. Then they would be working for their people. Right.
If we just strictly focused on the idea of the medicinal properties, you're right. But when you get to the idea of the whole plant, what it can do, if you want to go with just the medical, the entourage effect, but then like you're saying, the fuel, the byproducts, the plastics that can be created. And quite literally, we could probably take the medicine that you grow, once you strip all the oils off it, and then sell the remaining plant into the industrial market, and that could probably pay for the medicine side.
Right. The medicine could be a byproduct.
Exactly.
But nobody will do this.
We can't make any money on that, Rick.
This whole world is just really, there's nothing more than corporate madness all around us. Everybody's out there to try to make more money.
We're all consumers. We are consumers, not producers. The producers are those people who control everything and create us consumers. And we've been taught that you're either a consumer or you're a useless eater, because the people who are the producers are already established. We don't need any more producers. We just need more consumers. And I think you're absolutely right. This whole thing is set up. Government's trying to take control of it, because it's been prohibited, in my opinion, it's been prohibited for 78 years now, since 1937, coming up on 80 years. It's such a strong dichotomy. They've done such a good job of demonizing it that if government tried to take it over and say, oh, it's good, it's going to help, the public would just go insane apeshit, because one, realizing they've been lied to for so long, or two, people would say, wait a minute, you told me this is evil, it's bad, it's nasty, my government's evil, bad, nasty, so therefore I'm going to fight against it. So, they've put themselves into a position that they need us to give them the control. And in my opinion, that's what the idea of recreational legalized marijuana going throughout the states is. It's a way to make us feel like we're doing something for us, but ultimately we're giving them the very thing they cannot take for themselves. Power.
Well, I'm not saying so much like to persecute anyone, but I mean, we have to, you know, we're supposed to be intelligent. You know, it's more than obvious what's going on here. I mean, this truly is the darkest chapter in man's history, because since they outlawed the medicinal use of that plant, hundreds of millions, if not billions, worldwide have suffered and died for no reason other than greed.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
I agree.
You know? And so, I mean, it's a true horror story, and I'm not blaming the governments of today for what took place back then. But at least with all of this evidence that currently exists, these governments should be getting off their damn asses and doing something. You know, turn the cannabis plant free, and that in turn sets humanity free.
Right.
And it gives us a future. But if we continue on being dictated to by these rich ones that stand in the background, you know, and doing things their way, I figure within a very short time, I mean, the earth now is becoming more poisonous every day.
Right.
And in a very short time, we're just going to go extinct, because we're not designed to live in a poisoned environment. And that's most of the reason for all of these damn new diseases and so many people becoming sick.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's causing it. Our immune systems are becoming compromised because we're exposed to so many toxins.
Right.
No matter where we're at now.
Yep, and it's a double whammy, because not only are we exposed to the toxins, the cannabis has been ripped out of our ability to utilize for our own bodies, and now medically with the science background, the endocannabinoid system, the CB1 receptors, the CB2s, you know, we got CBVs, CBDs, CBSs, CBNs, CBRs, and you know, your THC, your THCA, which fundamentally still is a huge yin-yang effect to the CBDs in the medical system. You can't take one thing out and get a respectable reply without the rest of it. You know, now you got these heads, you know, Raphael McCullum from Israel, who's been studying this, the guy who, you know, found the active ingredient called THC. You know, he's now talking whole plant healing. You know, the entourage effect is the term they're putting on it in the medical terms. And yet our governments and all these people will go through there and just, it's hard to see that to come to the conclusion that you almost cannot point a finger at them and say, you know you're doing this, how can you not know it? And if you walked up to somebody and took their inhaler away while they were having an asthma attack and they died, is that not murder? And how is this not any different? But yet that you know, you can say that to them and woo, you know, just right over their head. That can't be just stupidity. They cannot be that ignorant, because we're supposed to be electing intelligent people. You know, I don't remember electing the village idiot to Senate last year. But we got them.
You see, I mean, all these political parties, no matter who you vote for, you know, in the States you got the Democrats, you got the Republicans, and in Canada you got the NDP, the Liberals, the Conservatives, the Green Party, and there's even a marijuana party.
Right.
You know, but in reality, I think that the vast majority, if not all of these parties, are bought and paid for, and it really doesn't matter who goes into power.
I think you're right.
Who goes in? I mean, elections today are all fixed anyway. We know that. We've known that since the Bush election, for sure. You know, Gore wins the presidency, and who becomes president? Makes a lot of sense to me.
Right.
You know, and I ran in politics twice myself. I ran to be a member of Parliament in Canada in 2006 and 2008 on this issue.
Oh, that's probably why they really started attacking you then, because you weren't just getting active publicly, you were getting active politically.
Oh yeah, you know, I was making as much noise. I mean, you know, like I said, it's not about retribution, but for God's sakes, let's wake up and recognize this for what it is.
Right.
And we have to realize that Jack Herer was right. You know, I remember in Jack Herer's wonderful documentary, Emperor of Hemp, towards the end of it, Jack says, you know, this is one of his statements. He said, I don't know what will save the world, but I do know that cannabis is the only thing that can.
Right.
And he was so right about that statement in all respects. I mean, it ends starvation, it supplies our energy, over 50,000 different things can be produced from cannabis. It put people back on the land, it could basically end unemployment. And I mean, look at things like Henry Ford's car in 1941. Right. You know, a hemp car. Well, what a good idea. 2/3 the weight of steel, but 10 times stronger.
Right.
So why are we driving these damn rust buckets that disintegrate in a very short time, right before our very eyes?
Right.
You know, this is ridiculous. We've become this throwaway society.
Mm-hmm.
We need products that last, and we need products that are built from non-toxic, you know, things such as cannabis.
Right.
You know, it is the future of humanity, and whether the big industrialists want to hear it or not, I don't really care. I mean,
yeah.
I'm fighting this battle for the people and no one else.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, and that's the biggest fight we really got to look at. That's why, you know, I'm using the moniker, because so many in Michigan here, and it seems to be throughout the country, the United States here, are of the mindset, you know, we got to take these baby steps. We got to do this idea of legalizing recreational first, you know, and that's becoming a popular statement in states that don't have a medical thing now. You know, 10 years ago, the idea was we need to legalize medical first. And, you know, now we need to take the baby step into a small recreational. And I see it just as a placation, as a diversion to draw, as you were saying, to draw those resources away to doing something really useful.
Well, I mean, since Jack Herer died, you know, it was Jack's dying wish that I was to be passed the torch, so I've become the leader of the movement. But there's so many people that are looked at as being activists in the hemp movement that are in favor of regulation and taxation and all of the rest of it. And
right.
I'm the leader of this movement. As far as I'm concerned, people that spout that kind of nonsense are not activists.
Well, they're not.
You know, I believe in total freedom when
right.
it comes to the cannabis plant.
I would look at it as, you know, they're not looking past that joint in the end of their hands, you know. And that's why I use that phrase, because there is so much more to just our own personal relationship with the plant or what we know it can do for ourselves or our families and the medical aspects. The nutritional side of it is a huge issue. Now, I've used this often. I think I said this last time. You know, we don't wait till we get scurvy to go to a doctor to get a thing, you know, prescription for oranges or a recommendation. We just eat oranges and we don't get scurvy. You know, and you know, to think that cannabis is the other option.
The ones Monsanto want to produce will probably give you scurvy.
Yeah, well, that's true. You're probably right with that. Yeah, and
vitamin C is good for you. We don't want you to have that.
Yeah, and I find it just kind of funny that so many people that are, you know, in this cannabis movement somehow still think that the government's going to be able to, you know, we need to appeal to them to make things right, when we've been appealing to them. Like in Michigan, we've had this Medical Marijuana Act for 6 years. The first year and a half was kind of mild, but then the Republicans got elected in, and then the Republicans made a hard push against it to, you know, cause all sorts of problems. And this is the same group of people that is going to be in charge of recreational marijuana, who just released these bills last week that are trying to usurp the medical marijuana. And we see this going on in every state. And I just find it the dichotomy, the cognitive dissonance, that somebody cannot go, well, geez, maybe we need to ask for the whole pie instead of worrying about trying to piddle for the crumbs. Because that's what we're being asked to do, is, you know, go deal with the crumbs because that's your pile. You leave the pie alone, that's government to deal with. And I'm like, you know, this is where I'm at. You know, no, we can't do this. Even, you know, I'm pushing this, you know, position to abrogate the law in Michigan. Like you said, they didn't have authority to make it, but the laws are on the books. However they're there, we still have to take them off. Yeah. If legislation ain't going to, that's where we, the people, need to, and there's a few ways we can do that. In Michigan, we have a pretty strong people's initiative process. Yeah. We can make a legislative initiative directive, which is what legalization of recreational is being passed, or we can do a constitutional amendment and actually do the Constitution side, which is what we did with our medical marijuana law, called a direct initiative amendment. So I'm looking at this.
You know, this is the initiative I'd like to see people take. I mean, if you yourself or someone you care about has a disease that is threatening their life, you know, how dare your government tell you you can't grow cannabis?
I agree.
I mean, I would simply go and I would grow the plants that are needed, and I would produce the extracts, and I would provide them.
Right.
You know, damn these laws.
That's what we need to do.
Anyway.
That's what we need to do.
And that's what's going to happen because, like you said, the poor people, and most of us are, the poor people can't afford to play these pharmaceutical games any longer. We can't afford their prices, you know, and we can't put any trust in them.
Can't wait
and
for the
government.
government's
approved, we can't put any trust in them.
Yeah, exactly. We can't wait for the government to do it for us because, you know, when they do it, they did it and you didn't. And who's got it when they do it? You know?
Yeah.
Another one of these little, you know, moniker statements I've been throwing around is, you know, you either do it and get it, because if you let somebody else do it for you, they got it and you don't.
Well, I say, you know, like I tell people, look, take the initiative. You know, I mean, I couldn't live with myself and sitting there and watch, say, a friend or a loved one die, you know, taking chemicals and poisons that I know are having detrimental effects on them.
Right.
When I sit there and I know how to cure them or to help them, I'm going to help them, and that's what I advise others to do. You know, damn these laws.
Right.
You know, help your friends and neighbors.
That's,
this is what we all should be doing.
Yeah, and you know, back to those ironic things. This is the other side of that coin, is trying to get them to believe it. Those people that are dying. I mean, my mom's got a friend who, a couple of them right now are dealing with cancer. One of them, you know, isn't interested, although her mind may be changing a little bit, even though she, you know, with my, you know, involvement, she knows where I'm at with it, my background with it. She knows what I know. I've been telling her, showing her the stuff, but even, you know, she's starting to now think about it. But even those people who are in the worst condition just cannot allow themselves to believe it could be true.
Well, these people have all been badly programmed. I mean, again, just go back to common sense. We all know what carcinogenic means. It means cancer-causing.
Correct.
And we all know, for a fact, that both chemotherapy and radiation both are carcinogenic. Therefore, they both cause cancer. And they're using cancer-causing treatments to treat our cancer.
Right.
You know, none of this makes any sense. You know, and you know, like, if people, I mean, like, a medicine, well, this is the reason I always look at chemo and radiation in the same light. I mean, it's just rank poison. The minute you take it, it just kills your immune system. Right. And then your hair all falls out.
Well, chemotherapy, chemotherapy itself came out of using mustard gas in World War I.
Right.
What does that tell you?
How could this trash be good for you? This is how badly programmed people are. I mean, we've been brainwashed through TV, you know, like TV shows, Ben Casey, Marcus Welby, all these doctor shows, you know, trust your doctor. Yeah. You know, and the same thing when you look at the legal system. Yeah. You know, Law and Order.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic you say that, you know, because that topic of, you know, all the shows that are on TV for the last 10, 15, 20 years have been law organized shows. You know, you got Cops and you got Law and Order and, you know, Hill Street Blues back in the day, and all these cop shows and Appeal to Authority. But yeah, I never made the connection that you're right. In the 70s, it was all about the doctors. Every show was a doctor. Marcus Welby, what was the one that Jack Klugman did? Where he was the mortician, Quincy. Yeah, you're right. In the 70s, they were all about doctor shows. I never made that connection before. Yeah, but you're right. That programming.
Oh yeah, it's all based on bad programming. There's no question, and it's hard to read because I mean nobody wants to admit that we could be brainwashed this easily, but the simple truth is we can be.
Absolutely.
And this is the proof in living color.
Well, you know, I go back to it's called a vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we call it what it is.
So I got mine off in 2003, and then I started watching the documentaries, and knowing what I knew about the oil, then I started connecting the dots, and then the whole world of corruption, you can see it. It's straight before your very eyes. Right. But most people just do not want to take the time, and some people just don't want to recognize it. I mean, I find that about 1 person in 10 will wake up very quickly, you know, when it comes to this subject. And then about 4 out of 10, if you spend 2-3 hours pounding it into their heads, then they start to wake up. But there's about 5 out of 10, about 50% of people, you can sit there and talk to them until the cows come home.
Yep.
They will reject this no matter what. And even then they'll make excuses. I've had people come to my house. So many people sit there and say, and I go at them for a couple hours, and then they look at me and they say, well, the government has to control the population.
Right.
And I would look at them and say, do you know where you live? This is Canada.
Yeah,
There's nobody here.
Yeah, you are population.
But they're just grasping at straws. They're looking for excuses for their damn government, who is obviously committing the crime.
Yeah, it's that cognitive dissonance because, it really boils down to that point, Rick. When people are at that position, they have to understand that they're responsible for it getting there. And people don't want to take that responsibility. And that's that half you talk about. They cannot refuse that because it would be so utterly earth-shattering to them. They probably would commit suicide because they know everything they know is a lie, but by admitting it, they have to accept it and then take responsibility for it, and they can't.
Well, basically we need to tear it all down and start all over again. But I think that, if we had, the money and resources that these rich people, have stolen from us, because they're all proceeds of crimes, really, that they committed against us. I think that we could, possibly have a smooth transition into a much more sensible way of life. And in reality, you're not doing it just for you. Look at your children. Look at your grandchildren. Look at the world that they're going to be forced to live into, or live in.
Right.
If you don't get off your ass and do something. You have to recognize reality when it's staring you in the face. And you see things like Fukushima, Gulf oil spill. You see all of this, these horror stories, the chemtrails, genetic modification, everything they're doing.
Oh.
In all of North America, none of the food is even safe to eat, for God's sake.
Right.
American beef cannot be sold here in Europe because it's looked at as being toxic because it has all these growth hormones.
You hear that, Americans? You hear that, Americans? Cannot be sold there.
We'll walk into a grocery store. Everything's, pesticides, preservatives, blah, blah, blah. When you look at these grocery stores, it used to scare me in Canada when I was still there, even to go to a grocery store, because I realized that practically everything in there was nothing much more than poison.
Right.
None of it was fit to eat. But people ignore this.
Food-like products.
I think people in Europe will have a much easier time when the crunch comes, because over here they're more self-sufficient. They grow their gardens, and it's a different culture. But in Canada, almost everybody, hardly anybody now grows a garden anymore.
Right.
And
it's the same here.
What happens when there's no food in the grocery store? What are they going to do? Eat each other?
Yeah, that's what these elites seem to be counting on. And that's a hard way to go out. Well, we got about 10 minutes left in this 2-hour section. I'd like to go off and just kind of take a little idea on your opinion of the masses of the people themselves compared to the masses of the people who are in government, in their position on this. One of the things that we hear a lot, I'm sure you hear it a lot, is they won't accept it. This idea of, repeal, what I'm talking about, abrogate, getting rid of the government's control over personal life, they won't let it happen. They won't accept it. Well, when you've been out in your world travel talking to just the people, what's your opinion? Do you think they can accept it? Or do you think it's something, in Europe, do they still over there, does the European concept mean, still into that idea the government's got to take care of it for us? What's your opinion on that?
I think we're all put in a position where we'll all have to accept it sooner or later. I did an interview here, or not an interview, I was actually having dinner last year in Ljubljana after I did a seminar with a judge and a local politician. And the politician kept saying to me, well, Rick, you can't take on the bear, the big money has all the power, la 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 la. And I just told him, I said, well, somebody better take on the bear. They're killing this planet and they're killing us. So about 2 minutes later, the same politician, he's talking to me, and he says, well, is my mother, she has Alzheimer's, and now they think she has Parkinson's. So I kind of started chuckle a little bit, and he said, well, what's so funny about that?
Right.
And I said, well, now you're the one who has to take on the bear. Because I said, if you want to treat your mother effectively, the only way to do that is with these extracts. Right. Now you're going to have to break the law. Now how does that feel? 2 months later, that same man drove all the way to Croatia just to see me. He walked in, and he looked at me, and he said, I didn't get it at first, but he said, you're right. It has to be made completely legal. And he said, I had a meeting just recently, he said, with some of the top executives in the pharmaceutical industry here in Europe. And he said, I brought your name up, and he said, Rick, they're scared shitless of you. But I mean, there's no reason to be afraid of me.
Right.
These are changing times. We have to get the world going in the right direction to save ourselves and to save other life on this planet as well.
Exactly.
I mean, we're doing everything in the wrong way. You know, we have to learn to work with nature, not against it. You know, and this is something that we've ignored, and you know, it really makes me wonder what our future truly is. But I can tell you one thing for sure, brother: if cannabis isn't in it, we don't have a future.
I agree. I mean, I agree with that. You know, in my own personal life, I've seen that, as I told you before, and I've mentioned a few times here for the podcast. You know, I started using pretty much daily at 13. As long as I could get it, I was getting it and using it. I started because I had a deal with my back. 13 years old, they gave me Percocets to deal with it.
Oh.
And you know, at 13, I took them for 4 days, and you know, pretty much was a loss of 2 weeks, and today still, that 2 weeks is still that fog, that chemical haze you're talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that you can't think clearly, you can't associate from day to day what day it even is. I did test, did homework, don't even remember it. Have no idea.
It all goes back to the Hippocratic Oath. You know, this is the oath that doctors are supposed to swear as they become doctors. You know, what does that oath say? First, do no harm, and as a doctor, I shall not administer poison.
Right.
Now, look what the doctors of today are doing. Now, I mean, I know the government has their policies and regulations, but doctors have to do what's right for their patients. And by giving them chemicals and poison, that's not what a doctor should be doing.
Right.
You know, if these doctors want to follow their own sacred oath, they have to stand up against the government, and then they have to start prescribing, you know, harmless medications.
Right.
Like these medications that can be produced from the cannabis hemp plant.
Yeah.
Then they would be real doctors.
Right.
So it's really a horror story what's going on, but more and more people are waking up, and there's a lot of doctors now that are starting, you know, to get on the right side of this because, you know, they know this is what's coming. In a short time from now, those cannabinoids that these resins contain, they're going to change the face of medicine as we know it forever.
Right.
And that's going to happen in the very near future. Well, it's happening now.
Correct.
You know, but I do take great pleasure in knowing that every day I'm costing the pharmaceutical industry more and more money. And it's not only me now, it's thousands, tens of thousands of people all
millions,
over the planet.
I think. Hundreds of thousands and 100 million, yeah. You know, that's I think your concern, my concern here, and people that will be tuning into the podcast, and hopefully people listening in will have the same concern, is, you know, the pharmaceutical takeover. Because that's what I'm seeing in the United States here on a, you know, local basis in my own state with how the legislation just come out of the judiciary to be voted on, is it's all geared up for a pharmaceutical takeover, and I don't know how I can trust that and trust that system to stay in place, knowing that my government started the war on cancer in 1971, the war on drugs in 1973, which found the weapon to win the war on cancer in 1974, reported in 1975, and then they hit it, doubled down on the war on drugs, and I watched my 2 sisters die from cancer.
Oh, by the way, we could win the war on drugs by simply giving drug addicts these extracts.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, that's the truth. We take people off of hydromorphine and horrible addictive substances like that they've been taking for months.
Yep.
Usually within
or years.
Yeah, and less than 2 weeks. The oil helps them get off it. They go through very little withdrawal symptoms, and then the oil can take their place.
Right.
People don't have to be using these horrible drugs that harm them.
Right.
You know, if you want to use, I consider cannabis a medicine that can be used with good effect recreationally.
Right.
So,
well, I look at it as
something to enjoy yourself. Take a medicine that's good for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's where it gets back to like the Hippocratic Oath, you know, where Hippocrates also said, "Let our food be our medicine, and let our medicine be our food." You know, same guy who gave us the Hippocratic Oath was a very fundamental of, you know, we need to eat good food before we worry about getting sick, because then we won't get sick. And this whole idea of cannabis being that. But yeah, so you know, I'm hoping that people can come to the idea that, you know, they is us. When people say they won't allow that, you are saying I can't allow that, because in Michigan we have this thing called the right to vote. And everybody's got that democratic right, even though we're not a democracy. So, you know, it was that right to vote was given to us so mob could rule. Well, let's make the mob rule for the right ones. But we need to do that because of the system that I live in the States. We're set up in a voting setup. For us, our government isn't going to do it, so it's going to be bound to us, and our only option of doing that without picking up our Second Amendment and using our first is to do the vote. So I'm hoping people can see their way to, you know, supporting what I'm trying to push, because that's what I'm trying to do, you know, get the government out of our personal lives. Parents shouldn't have to worry about going to prison for treating their children with cannabis before they go to the medical community, because cannabis is a sustenance. It's a food. It's a nutritional, you know, substance.
And it's the best thing you can give your child. And I mean, what we need right now, we need people to, you know, just like the Beatles song, you know, come together.
Yeah.
You know, and if we come together in a rational way and you know, and unite in one voice and just tell our governments, look, we've had enough of this nonsense. We don't need violence. We just need the numbers of people that are willing to stand up and see that we can give this planet and ourselves a future. That's
right.
what we need, and we need them now.
Yeah, we need to come out of the cannabis closet and step out there. I mean, I've been trying to entice a lot of my friends who are, you know, we'll call them closet users. They may not be daily users, but they've got a mortgage, a house, a kid in college now, so they really are afraid of that thing. We need to step out of that fear, because that fear is what keeps us absolutely locked in that gilded cage we're in.
You're quite right, brother. Time for change.
Time to change. Rick, we're about 2 hours in, so I want to say thank you, sir. I would offer you anytime you want to call, get on, anything that comes up that you need, a field needs to get say, let me know. We'll get you on and we'll put it out there, and I appreciate your time, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, brother.
And you have a great day. And right on, man. Yeah, I just looked and we've got 2 hours plus already, so.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to get that set up, and it'll probably be airing tonight, and I'll get you the links again. Okay, thank you so much for your time again, and anything you want to go out with?
On this show? Well, I mean, it's just that people have to realize that, you know, we make our own future. We've got to take our lives back, you know, to this way of life that has been keeping us shackled to this insanity. You know, we have to make our own destiny. We have to make our own future. And with cannabis, we can do that in a rational way. So I just want people, like I said, to stand together and really look at things, you know, open your eyes and look at things for what they really are. Cannabis is the only thing that offers us a future.
Correct.
And it's the most sensible thing that I think anyone can do. You know, so damn the laws, you know, let's make the changes that are needed, and let's all try to find that better way of life that we're all searching for.
Absolutely. I would say, I think, you know, we just need to be adults about this.
That's right. Use common sense.
Thank you. Rick, you have a wonderful day or evening for you, and it's early afternoon, so I've got a bunch of stuff to get done.
Okay, brother. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you again.
All right. Bye-bye.
And there you have it. 2 hours of open, candid, straight up, easy conversation with the one and only Rick Simpson. Thank you, Rick, for your time. It's been a great interview and a great time talking to you, sir. For the MichICAN Nightly Radio Show, the Perception Deception Show, this is Timothy Locke, your host, and we will see you tomorrow night.